Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first in the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's webinar series, an introduction to philatelic exhibiting. I'm Gregg Redner. I'm the president of the RPSC, and we're really glad that you're all here. It's such a wonderful turnout, and we're heartened to see you. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are checking in from. We're looking forward to being able to take you through this 3 Tuesday nights back-to-back series on exhibiting. The point of this series is to demystify how what goes on when one becomes an exhibitor. I'm going to be beginning tonight with a little bit of a irreverent discussion about what exhibiting is and how one goes about getting into it and why you would want to. But next week, Andrew Kelly, who is an award-winning exhibitor and a really fine communicator on things in terms of philatelic exhibiting, is going to be talking to you after you've been inspired by this evening to give a thought to an idea for an exhibit, how to develop that idea into an exhibit. And then Andrew McFarlane will do the third presentation, which is on how to write a synopsis and how to write a title page. And Andrew has written the book on that. And so we're really glad to have both these gents with us. So we're going to begin with our land acknowledgement. The RPSC, as a organization with vice-regal patronage, is responsible for abiding by the wishes of the Governor General as a royal organization. And so one of the things that we as an organization are trying to do is to live into reconciliation with the Indigenous community in Canada. And so one of the ways we do that is to read a land acknowledgement at the beginning of each program. Like many organizations in Canada, the Board of Directors of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada has chosen to acknowledge Indigenous peoples in Canada with the following statement. As a step towards reconciliation, the RPSC acknowledges that our national office in Toronto stands on the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Our national office is also covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. Furthermore, we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples did not give up the lands that they had been on for thousands of years that now constitute Canada. We also acknowledge that Europeans did not discover Canada or arrive on an uninhabited land. The RPSC acknowledges that Canada is covered by many treaties and modern lands, resources, and self-government agreements with Indigenous peoples, and that the provisions of many of these arrangements remain unfulfilled. The RPSC further acknowledges that many Indigenous peoples in Canada have not had their rights fully recognized and implemented according to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The RPSC pledges to promote recognition and knowledge of Indigenous peoples in Canada and elsewhere, and their cultures through philately. We will also work towards building a positive relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada. All right, well, as we were saying, one of the things that we're going to be doing is giving away a copy of late David Piercy, who sadly passed away earlier this year, who was really one of the great exhibiting gurus in Canada. And he wrote this wonderful book, Let's Talk Exhibiting. And so we're going to give away one copy of this, which will, I'll tell you how to, if you're chosen for it, I'll tell you how to get your address to me and we will mail it to you directly. We're going to be giving away one each week. So tonight's question, which I hope that you will put in the answer of which I hope you will put under the chat function is, what's holding you back from beginning to exhibit? You can think about that. You can wait till the end of the presentation or at any time add it in. And then with the help of my team here, we will select a person at random, and hopefully you will be that person and receive this wonderful book. Okay, so as I said, I want to take a kind of irreverent view of philatelic exhibiting. There are people for whom philatelic exhibiting is the absolute most important thing in their it's in some cases in their life, I would say. And in no way, shape, or form are we diminishing the people that have that worldview. There are people who have spent years building a world class award-winning exhibit and they exhibit at a very high level. I'm assuming that most of the people that are coming to this webinar tonight either exhibit and are interested in some new ways of looking at it, or have never exhibited before. And those are the people for whom this webinar series is directed. But if you are a world-class award-winning exhibitor, please know you are welcome, and we greatly appreciate your leadership. So who would ever want to voluntarily become a philatelic exhibitor? We've all heard the stories of how difficult it is and how many rules there are. Some people have even suggested that philatelic exhibiting is the hobby version of dental surgery. And I hope by the end of this webinar or this evening's presentation that you won't have that feeling. Maybe you will agree that this won't actually hurt a bit by the time we're done this evening. There are some common misconceptions about exhibiting. Here are some of them, and you could probably add some of your own. It's very difficult to do. It's very expensive to do. Meaning, if you don't have a lot of money to spend, why bother doing it? If you don't collect, penny blacks, or you don't collect, small queens, or grill stamps from the U.S. Or any number of other things, why bother to do it? Because you have to have so much money to buy these things. It is only heavy-hitting philatelists that do it. It is true that there are only about 800 active exhibitors in Canada, but many of those people, and I would include myself in this, do it because of pure enjoyment and not because we expect to win major grand awards or best in shows. You have to be a philatelic exhibitor to do it. One of the things people are most afraid of is the research part of it. And so tonight I want to show you or help to explain why I don't think that you have to be worried about that to begin. Second, or fifth, is that the judges hate you and are waiting to pounce on the first thing that you do wrong. I have to say, as a judge, a judging apprentice in Canada, national judge apprentice, I have been absolutely delighted at how lighthearted judges are. And they take their job very seriously, but I have not met a judge in the US or in Canada in my time exhibiting or in this program that is just waiting to drop the hammer on somebody. They take their role as one of helping you to improve your exhibit. And you can take the advice that they give or not. We would all agree that that's a good approach to it. So I've never met a judge that's out to get you. There's no point in doing it if you don't get a large gold. I would say to you, if you're coming into this worried about medal levels, you're probably going to be disappointed. But as I'm going to show you later on, sometimes you're surprised by this. So I don't think that medal levels should come into this to begin with. Here's another one. My subject is not important enough, so why bother? There is the thought that if it's not at least 100 years old, or 150 years old is even better, some people will say, that really, what's the point of doing it? Nobody's going to take it seriously. And I would say that nothing could be farther from the truth. If you're interested in it, this is an amazing way, in your topic, this is an amazing way to educate people on the importance of the thing that you love. Last of all, the Philatelic police are waiting to raid your house and arrest you for inconsequentiality. And I would say that with recent budget cuts in Canada, the Philatelic police have been disbanded, and there's no need to worry about that any longer. Okay, one of my all-time favorite quotes in a board meeting that I've ever attended, and I will not use the person's name that said this because I haven't asked their permission. Things were getting a little bit intense, and this person put their hands up and said, "Hey, folks, hang on. This is a hobby. It's supposed to be fun." And I love this the movie League of Their Own. Tom Hanks, of course, plays the manager in that, and a very famous scene with Madonna where he yells, "There's no crying in baseball." And I'd like to say there is no crying in philatelic exhibiting. As you'll see, there's a path to this that will hopefully prevent you from having to worry about that. I like to think that exhibiting is almost as exciting as playing softball. Almost. Nothing is quite as exciting. And here I'm speaking to my Canadian counterparts. Nothing is quite as exciting as baseball or softball, regardless of what you think about hockey. Playing baseball is the best sport in the world. But you can apply whatever you want here. The idea of exhibiting is to enrichen your experience with your stamps. I heard someone say one time that when we're disappointed in the baseball player that batted .220 during the year and missed the ball that was coming through that cost us a big game, that we think, what a bum that guy is. And in fact, that guy is in the top 0.1% of baseball players in the world. So I bring it up this way. You are probably one of the top experts on your particular area of interest. And just because you may not, people may not know about you, doesn't mean that you don't have something to share and teach, because you most certainly do. I would say the only thing I would give up stamp collecting for was a regular opportunity to play with a good baseball team. But anyway. Okay, what's my story? This is young Gregg at the age of 17, sitting in front of one of his grandpa's milk trucks. I come from a family of mechanics and of truckers. I was the first person in my family to go to university. My family is far from what you would call fancy. They're just good, normal people like your family is. Again, the idea is that you have to have a special way of looking at the world to be a good exhibitor. I learned about stamp collecting at the age of 8 from my dad. We were on a boat trip, and my parents gave me a stamp collection, kind of a packet of stamps and an album to keep me from wreaking mayhem and keeping me occupied. Of course, I didn't have any hinges, so I glued all those stamps into the album, which I don't encourage. At the age of 10, I began collecting with my dad, who was a very informal collector, not a researcher or someone who dug very deep, but he loved his stamp collection, and because he loved it, I did it. The probably seminal moment in my collecting career, early collecting career, came at 17 when I got a Canadian cover that had both US and Canadian stamps on it. And I didn't have any idea why this would be the case. And I know that many of you here understand why that is. But I didn't understand it. And I was part of a wonderful stamp club in lower New York. And the man who had invited me to join the stamp club said, you know, I collect Spain. I can't really advise you on this, but there's this wonderful man named Tony Warwickevich. Why don't you send Tony a copy of your cover and ask him? And if any of you know Tony Warwickevich, who's famous for his work in American auxiliary marks and postal history and rates and all of those things, he sadly died about 6 months ago. But he sent this kid who he didn't know, who was 17 years old, a 4-page typewritten description of what my cover was, why it went the way that it did, what happened, how it was rooted, what all of the marks meant, and I was hooked. All I thought was, this is a cool cover that just had a couple of stamps on it, and that really lit the kind of deeper collecting bug in me. At 19, I discovered a far off, remember I lived in the US at this point. We don't learn a lot about Canada down there. I learned, at 19, I discovered a far off exotic land called Newfoundland. And I started to collect Newfoundland stamps. Once I discovered that Newfoundland was actually part of Canada, I started collecting Canadian stamps. And at 38, I had kind of filled every spot in the Canadian album that I could fill. And so I moved on to Belgium because I had some letters that my grandpa had written to my grandmother from Belgium during World War I, and I liked the stamps. Now I concentrate on the terribly exciting world of Belgian auxiliary labels, printed matter rate, and Belgian parcel post stamps. I know you're thinking to yourself, wow, how can I get into that? So what do I get out of exhibiting? Well, what I get out of exhibiting is the following. It focuses my attention on my collection. I have to do more than just look at it. I have to actually engage with it and ask questions. It helps me bring order out of chaos. One of the reasons there's a backdrop currently on my Zoom screen is if you could see the piles and piles of albums and glassine envelopes that create the chaos in my stamp room, you would probably be very, very disgusted with me. But it helps me focus my collection and create organization where there's just chaos. I really love to research and dig deeper into a subject. And I also need a project to keep me interested, and my wife would also say to keep me out of trouble. And honestly, I just love the challenge of taking something that's not terribly significant and finding out why it actually is significant. I see we have a question here. Do I still have that cover? Yes, I do. Glenn Minchell asked, do I still have that cover that I sent to Tony Warwickevich? Yes, I do. And it's along with the letter, which I keep in the album, separated by glassine though, because it's not on acid-free paper. All right, good. So let's go on now. So my first attempts at exhibiting included some really, really exciting topics, at least to me. The American Revolution in stamps, which I showed at a local show. Baseball on stamps, again, my love of baseball, which I showed at a local and a regional show. A really, really awful exhibit called The Magic of Newfoundland, which I also showed at a regional show and was didn't go very well. I tried to get into the Canadian Dead Letter Office for a while. I still actually do collect that and I'm interested in it, but I haven't exhibited it in probably 20 years. But I did that in a US show. I'm also an organist, so pipe organs of the world at a national show, which was a topical exhibit, and famous composers, which I did at a regional and national show. So here's the question. How did this go? Well, let's take a look. This is an actual. So when you think that you have to be really good at school and writing and researching and doing all that stuff, this is an actual copy of my grade 3 report card. Um, and it will show you that I was far from an excellent student. Um, and I didn't do particularly well. How did my exhibits perform? I got a lot of really kind and encouraging comments from the judges, and a lot of thoughts on how I could improve my exhibit. Um, I didn't. I was very excited to get a silver award on almost all of them. Um, I've only gotten one bronze award in my life, and I've never ever been able to get a silver bronze, which is the hardest of all exhibiting levels to get. But I was very happy with it, and I tried to do what the judges suggested to me. However, some people said to me, "Get a job, kid. You'll never be any good at this." Um, Wonderful Burgess Meredith, who actually lived about 3 streets over from me when I was a boy. He had a summer house. If you know him from his role as Mickey, the manager in Rocky, that's where this is from. Get a job, you bum. But I couldn't do it because I'd fallen hook, line, and sinker for this. There was something to me so incredibly exciting about mounting an exhibit and putting it a show and having people look at it and having them talk to me about it, that I never, in spite of my challenges, and remember, I know that most of us that are here probably will remember these days. I never, I hand wrote all of my exhibits until the early 2000s. So they didn't even look very good, but I just loved it. So why did I decide to subject myself to the torture of exhibiting? Um, I'm most motivated when people say I can't do something. You're going to see this later on when we look at an example of this kind of how to pick a topic for an exhibit. It was a challenge. It was fun developing something that was completely my own. Um, I could decide how the covers were put on the page. I could decide where the stamps went. I could choose what I put on it, and I could choose what I wrote up. Again, it focused my collecting. I found that I enjoyed becoming an expert, in quotes, please, on a small corner of the philatelic universe. This is something that people don't very often think about. I really liked the camaraderie. I was a young guy in a hobby with a lot of people that were older than I was. Um, those of you that know me will probably be very surprised to find out that I'm actually incredibly shy. And it was very hard for me to go up and talk to those people, especially the ones that were really great at it. I will say that they went out of their way to encourage me and include me in the club. But I like the camaraderie that came out of standing near my exhibit and having people talk to me about it. So it connected me with other people in the philatelic community. Um, and as we all know, especially today, and trust me, I'm a huge advocate of digital philately. I really am. Um, uh, Today, we're even slightly more separated than we were in those days. So I like the connection. I like to go to shows. I like to talk to people about their exhibits. I like to learn about why they did what they did, and sit down and have lunch with them. So the biggest reason that exhibiting interested me was because there is that moment, unless you have a bottomless purse, there is that moment when you realize there's nothing else you can add to your collection. There's a dead end ahead. I'm assuming that almost everybody on this will have a somewhat limited budget. We only have so much money we can spend, and as much as I really, really want to buy a couple of the really difficult Belgian stamps that are hard to find and go for $15,000 to $20,000. There's just no way I'm ever going to do that. So I had to find something else to maintain my interest. No spaces, at least the ones that I can afford. Now what? If you're a Canadian collector, you'll know why I chose this stamp on the left-hand side. A perfect example of what I can't afford and will never own. So I was at a crossroads. My options were ask someone for a loan to buy these stamps. That clearly wasn't going to happen. Start collecting a different country from scratch, something like Azerbaijan, perhaps. Start collecting mint stamps only. I had a mix of mint and used stamps in my album. Well, we can take them out and start replacing the used one with mint ones. But that didn't seem very interesting to me. Or I could dig deeper into my collection. So this is how I became an exhibitor. It's simple but true. I love this. This is from my collection of baseball books I have. This is what exhibiting was like to me. Ted Williams tells us what makes a good hitter. Alan McDougall told me what it took to be a good exhibitor. And I felt like these were people that actually knew how to do this, who would help me, because the philatelic community, as I know it, is a very giving and a very helpful community. So what did I have to do? I had to become a specialist. Now, I want to suggest that there are three ways that you can progress into becoming an exhibitor. This came, I realized that I had done this when I was younger, but Steve Johnson, who's a philatelic judge, and many of you will know through his association with Canpex, I was doing an apprenticeship on a jury that he was on, and as we were walking through, he said, "Yeah, this is a collection. This person has a collection of these stamps, and they've mounted them." And then we moved a little bit longer, and he said, "Great, this is," and we're not talking about display category. I want to be clear. He said, "So this is a display now. This person has some attractive items, and they wanted to put them up so we could see them." And then a little while later, he said, "This is an exhibit." And I really am grateful to Steve for this, because it helped me realize that there are three stages that are very helpful to entering the philatelic exhibiting universe. Number one, becoming an this isn't number one. Becoming an exhibitor is an easy and less stressful path if you do this. So why did I pick this picture? I decided on a topic that was interesting to me. Like this man, he clearly loves his milk bottles. In my collecting, I specialize on Belgian stamps, which are issued just after the close of World War I, the period 1919 to 1921. How big is your topic? Mine included somewhere around 40 stamps, but with a lot of varieties. I decided that this was actually a manageable collection to put into an exhibit. So I created an exhibit of my Belgian stamps, and I put them in a local show, like this man has done. I don't know, there are milk bottles behind him, so maybe this is a milk bottle exhibit. I don't know if such a thing exists, but he's arranged his milk bottles in a way that's attractive. He loves the milk bottles, and he wants to share them with you. That let me just go back for a second. That path is creating it's displaying a collection of things, and that's what I did. I took my stamps in the period that I specialized in, and I showed them. Not a lot of organization, not a lot to learn, but I wanted to get them on an exhibit, so I created a collection that I mounted. So to be more specific with your topic was the next stage. So I decided to focus out of the 1919 to 1921 Belgian stamps on the 1920 Antwerp Olympics issue. I went through my collection. I found everything that related to the Olympic issues, including overprints and postal stationery. I organized these into a 2-frame exhibit. And what I ended up with was a display of a portion of my collection. Now, this is my dad's collection, or was my dad's collection of oil cans. And he could explain to you why these oil cans were in the order. He was a mechanic. He loved mechanical things. He could explain to you why these oil cans were arranged the way that they were. They were put on in this form to display them to what he believed was the maximum potential of the collection. Don't ask me what it was. I don't know. But I created a display of the stamps within a smaller part of my collection that had to do with the 1920 Olympics. Next, I decided there was no real focus in my exhibit, and we're going to get into this in a little bit. The topic was too broad to be well displayed. I love this John Locke quote, where there is no law, there is no freedom. We think we're being free when we can put whatever we want on the page, and that's fun. There's nothing wrong with that. But the judge's feedback suggested that I might want to try to limit the scope of my Antwerp Olympics. A couple of them use the phrase pleasantly meandering. They also suggested I might want to research a little bit on the how and why of the stamps. I have to be honest, I hadn't really thought of this. It was just around the time that the internet was taking off, and I didn't have a lot of access to material. Luckily, living in New York City, I was able to go to the New York Public Library, and I found a lot there. So the how and why of that intrigued me, and I'd never really thought about actually doing it. This is my Philatelic library at home. Actually, no, it's not. It's actually the Morgan Library in New York City, but I wish it was my library. So here's what I did. I decided to learn everything I could about that particular issue of stamps in Belgium. I joined a number of related societies, the Sports Philatelists International. I joined the Belgian Philatelic Study Circle. I wrote to experts that I was able to identify through the help of people in those organizations. I asked them questions. They wrote back to me. After a while, they sent me emails. I made some really good friends who were always happy to help. A little bit later on, with the advent of Del Camp, Hipstamp, eBay, I created searches that focused on my particular interest, the 1920 Olympics. And every night I would go in to see if anything new had been added. You can always tell because it says new on them if you search most recent. And I started to create what originally was a scrapbook of things I printed off the internet, and eventually was a series of photos I had saved with descriptions on them. I contacted the Belgian National Archives, full well expecting them to not respond or say we can't help you. I found an intern over there who loved stamps, and that person provided me with so much more information than I ever dreamed I would get. I eventually started to explore digital library platforms. Yes, most organizations have a paywall up that will suggests that you can only access the last 3 or 4 years of their journal, but if you're a member. But the majority of the rest of the information is open to the public. I found that if I search digital library platforms for these organizations, I could find a lot of information. The most important thing was I began to learn about my collection, my stamps. By the end of the process, I'd become a specialist in my area. Now, I want to be appropriate and humble about this. There are people who know much more about the Belgian, the Antwerp Olympics than I do. There are Olympic composers that know, or sorry, Olympic collectors that know everything there is, or so it would seem, about particular Olympiads which they're interested in. But I am a specialist in that area because I have a great deal of specialized knowledge that the average person doesn't have. I do feel that I've become an expert on the 1920 Olympic issue. I now understand the how and why of the issue. We're going to get to that in a minute, which led me to be able to organize my exhibit and my collection better. I now knew what belonged and what didn't. And I decided to focus only on the 1920 issue for the next few years to try to develop my exhibit. So I mounted my exhibit and was amazed at how concise and well planned it was. I had essentially gone from somebody that showed their collection, displayed their collection, to an exhibitor, and I didn't even realize that it had happened. This is the title page of my one-frame exhibit on this, on the Antwerp Olympic Games. What's interesting is after doing all of this research, what I realized was my exhibit had actually been cut in half. Rather than expanding, it had been reduced. And it continues to be a one-frame exhibit. What'll be wonderful is at the end of this, the third week of this, you will actually have a chance to learn the steps to writing a good title page and a synopsis. Okay, so just to review, 3 simple steps on the path to exhibiting. Mount a collection. Mount what you love. Refine it a bit and create a display. Last of all, if you're still interested, develop an exhibit. On the journey, and as Lao Tzu said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so I would say to you, why not put an exhibit together, a collection together, and show it in your next local show? Okay, let's look at a case study. I wanted to try something that everybody counseled me against. I wanted to take one of the least respected and cheapest and ugliest stamps that Belgium ever created and create an exhibit for it. And that is the 1920 King Albert I 3-cent issue. I mean, you could not have found a less attractive color for a stamp than this washed out gray, but there's a reason for it. The reason it looks the way it does, it was the last stamp, the King Albert I issue, the 1915 issue. This was the last stamp, which was released in 1920 on New Year's Eve. This is a historic, the 1915 King Albert I issue is kind of equivalent to the Admiral edition or the Maple Leaves edition or issue of Canada. But this stamp has never gotten any respect. And I wanted to prove that it doesn't have to be expensive or rare to be a successful exhibit. So, number one, I heard Cheryl Gans say this when she's looking to create a new article or some research or create a new exhibit. The first thing she does is go to the digital library platform and see what's been written about it. And I went to the APS, wonderful APS digital library platform, which you can belong to, by the way, even if you're not an APS member. It's one of the things I respect the most about the APS is they allow the digital platform to be accessed by collectors from all over the world. So I put in, COB stands for the Catalogue Officiel de Belgique, which is abbreviated as COB, which is the most important catalog for Belgian stamps. I put in COB 183, which is the King Albert I 3-cent issue on the APS, and nothing came back. I looked on the Belgian Academy, their publications, their journal, nothing came back. And then I went to the Belgian Philatelic Study Circle, which has a storied journal that goes back about 50 years. And I typed in Cobb 183, and this is what came up. The second article has nothing to do with this stamp at all. And the first article was 1.5 pages long, and was more just, this is the last stamp in this issue, more explaining why it's not significant than why it is significant. And I thought to myself, okay, you're really on to something now. So I examined my collection to discover what was in it. Because I concentrate on 1919 to 1921, and I collect all of the stamps in that period, I had quite a bit of material in this regard. So I examined online platforms, as we said, to see what was out there. I tried to find out what existed in terms of pre-production material, issue dates on covers, different rates and uses, exotic destinations, errors, earliest known use, latest known use, largest known use. And then also I decided to go into pre-cancels and perfins as well. Here's what I found out. There was virtually no pre-production material for this stamp, because they used the plates of pre-existing 1915 stamps that were issued before the war to produce these. There were no essays. There was nothing that I could use to kind of paint the background picture, except for one plate proof that I found, which could have been from that issue. And this is a very boring rate to use. It's a 3-cent imprimé rate. Imprimé is printed rate, which means this stamp by itself could only be used for printed matter, for calling cards, and for postcards that had less than 5 words on it. I mean, we're not talking about fascinating material here, or so I thought. You couldn't use this to send this printed matter rate outside of the country. So single-use exotic destinations didn't exist. There were 2 small errors, but nothing dramatic. And this stamp was used into the late 1920s, long after it had become the principal imprimé rate stamp. It was replaced almost instantly. So I started to ask questions. Is this stamp important? Why is it important? Another question that's really interesting is, why has it been ignored? What were the political circumstances that this stamp came into existence from? What were the postal circumstances? How does the stamp fit into the context of the other issues of the period? And what I discovered was fascinating. Was this stamp important? Yes, it was very important. After the Germans were defeated and left Belgium, the country was in absolute wreck. The postal system had been destroyed when the Germans invaded in 1914, because they didn't want any of the information to be, or any of the tools to be useful to the German government. So it was largely destroyed. And what happened was, right after the war, the Belgian government, the German rates were so punitive that the Belgian government decided to reduce the rates back to pre-war period. There was one minor increase about a year later, when they realized we're never going to be able to rebuild the system unless we raise the rates. And then one rate increase on December of 1920, December 31st of 1920, which was very, very unpopular, because they needed the money to rebuild the postal service. So this was the political circumstances in which this stamp issued and the postal circumstances were fascinating. They needed a stamp quickly because they realized that the postal service was on its way to going bankrupt. So they chose this 1915 plate. They changed the numeral, the value designation on it, and they printed it really quickly. How does it fit into the context of the other issues of the period? It's the only stamp of the period that doesn't celebrate victory in World War I. It's purely utilitarian. So the number one thing when you're creating an issue is the following. You need to have a story. You need to have a narrative. If it doesn't tell a story, you're just basically mounting stamps and covers. So it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I had found my narrative. I knew why they brought it in, what was going on in the world, in their country at that time. I knew the reasons it was brought in. I knew the reasons the stamp was replaced really quickly was that it was unbelievably ugly and made people very upset. And it was replaced within 18 months of coming in with a stamp of the same value. And then the rate went up sometime 5 years later, so there wasn't even a reason to do it. It was a real political hotbed. So when you're doing this, you find yourself asking, which came first? Which do I do first? Do I do the title page first, or I do the synopsis first? These are the two things that terrify most people when they're collecting, when they're creating an exhibit. The title page and the synopsis is terrifying to people. But the answer is you don't have to do either one. You have to create your story first. You have to figure out how you're going to position your stamps. A very bright person told me when I was doing a degree that you don't write the introduction to your thesis until you're done writing the thesis, because you actually don't know what the point of what you're doing is until it's finished. And I would say the same thing about this. The point of an exhibit is to tell a story. And out of that story comes both the title page, which gives you the plan for it, and the synopsis, which explains why you did what you did. But those things don't come to the very end. So the story provides the structure. Once I have a story line, I can develop a plan for the exhibit. I know what I'm going to be doing. One of the trickier things is to try to balance the respective sections of your exhibit. This isn't always possible, but what I mean by this is I had the political circumstances. I had a fascinating collection of stamps that were placed on printed matter rates with the stamp upside down. And in Belgium, I don't know about other countries, if you place the stamp upside down, you're either saying it's down with the monarchy or you're upset about something to do with rates. So I had a fascinating collection of political things. I didn't have a lot on pre-production material. I had a lot on imprimatur rates, but I didn't have a lot on exotic destinations. So it wasn't easy for me to balance it so that I had, say, a quarter of it on this and a quarter on that, a quarter on the non-imprimatur rates, and then a quarter on with an epilogue. So once I had laid out my plan, I could look at how balanced the exhibit was, and that helped me to discover where there were holes in my collection and what I needed to fill, or when one section was light and needed more. But all of this came out of the story, which gave me the plan, and the plan gave me a sense of how my exhibit was weighted. And look, oh my, at the end, we had an article about it. Now, I really like to write, and I like to publish. A lot of people don't like to do that. But writing an article is very similar to preparing an exhibit. And one of the byproducts of working through an exhibit is that one often finds oneself with an article at some point, which, if you think about it, very few people are ever going to see your exhibit. depends on where you show it, but if you only show it in Canada, nobody in the US is going to see it. Certainly no one in Europe is going to see it. But if you write an article, you can teach people about your subject and explain to them why it's important, and why it deserves respect. So I always find that at the end of creating an exhibit, I have an article, although sometimes I do my story and my plan and my general layout, write the article, and then that helps me to be able to do my synopsis and title page. But I'll leave that for Andrew on the third week to talk about. One of my favorite TV shows as a kid was the Charlie Brown Christmas, and I love when Charlie Brown goes to Lucy, the doctor, the psychiatrist, and says, "I'm just not happy. I don't really know what Christmas is all about." And she says, "Charlie Brown, the mere fact that you realize you need help indicates that you're not too far gone." When I was done with my 1920 King Albert exhibit, 3-cent exhibit, I realized suddenly that I didn't know if it was any good or not. So I showed it to a bunch of knowledgeable philatelic friends for feedback. I had a rough synopsis and a rough title page, and they read them and tried to figure out what I was trying to do. The big question that I asked them was, can you follow what I'm trying to do in this exhibit? Does it make sense? And in some cases, they didn't think it did, and they gave me some really great advice. Another really interesting experiment is to show your exhibit to a non-philatelic friend or family member and see if they can follow what you're doing. Just say to them, "I'm just concerned about the story, and I just want to know if you kind of can follow, just even from the headings at the top, what I'm doing." Very rarely has anybody actually been able to do that, but every once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, I get it." Regardless, if your family is totally confused, the average person that doesn't know a lot about your subject will probably also be confused. Some practical issues now. You have to be very careful with mounting your exhibit. So I just have a few kind of basic things to look out for. Number one, use acid-free paper for your final mounting. Now, I know some people will say use acid-free paper for all of your mounting, and that's true. But if you're going to leave your exhibit on your mounted, you want to make sure the paper is acid-free. Now, most paper today is, but you want to look for archival quality paper. I use 80-pound paper, which is a very thick, almost cardstock, because it supports the things that are on the page really well. I like bright white best for my exhibits. But recently I've come to start to believe that if you're using older postal history, like from the 19th century, and those things are toned or colored, they don't look really very good on bright white paper. So you might want to use something a little more taupe. You want to put your exhibit in page protectors. Those also need to be acid-free, so archival page protectors. Use clear mounts when you put your exhibit up. I don't really understand why this is such a big deal, but most judges, if you use a dark color like a black mount for your stamp, people will say, "Oh, it looks like a morning cover." It's one of those things. I actually really like the way black black mounts and mats look, but most judges don't. So the darker the mount, and the darker the mat for a special piece, the more a judge is going to say it looks like a morning cover. Be forewarned, I still get it sometimes. You have to put headings to explain where your title page is taking people so they can find things easily. Use simple headings. Designing your exhibit, you can use any publication type of software that you want for your exhibit. I use Microsoft Word. A lot of people use Microsoft Publisher. Andrew Kelly next week will tell you that he uses Adobe InDesign. It's an amazing product, but you certainly have to understand how to do it, and the learning curve is a little steeper. People at the local and regional level still hand letter their exhibits, and you can do that. Don't be afraid to exhibit because you're not great at manipulating a word processing project. Um, Use different color borders to differentiate things between things that are rare. I use red borders for rare material, and I use blue borders for, or blue, even blue type for any original research I do. As you work on your exhibit, you'll need to make adjustments. And the first time I did a serious exhibit, I fell into this trap. I used my good paper for printing out the pages and checking size and to see if things fit and how the layout was. I would suggest that if you're not going to actually mount your exhibit while you're doing this, you're just going to place things on the paper for a few seconds. Just use cheap copier paper for this. This way you can adjust as need be without wasting money on expensive paper. Once you're happy with the feedback of your friends and you've made adjustments you feel you should, I would encourage you to make use of the AAPE, American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, exhibit critique service. You scan your exhibit and you send it in, and 3 senior philatelic judges or exhibitors will look at your exhibit and critique what they see. I always like to think they're actually sitting at a table like this and passing it around, but they actually just, that doesn't happen, obviously. So you will find that these things are really helpful, especially if you haven't shown it yet. And while you may not agree with everything, you will find in the end that they will point out things that you didn't see. The service is free and it's really worth using. Some resources. I would join the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors. To read the Philatelic Exhibitor, which everything except the last year is available online for free, so you don't have to belong, but it's nice to belong if you're going to use the resources. They also have a wealth of exhibits online that you can look at, including a section which has AAPE awards. And you're very often able to see specific exhibits that won awards for particular reasons. Please download the judging manual. The Kane J Philatelic Judging Manual that Canada and the US have published jointly. This is can be found on the RPSC or the APS website. Know what the rules are. Download the judge's exhibit form, which can also be used. I'm going to show you that in a minute, but you can find it under Uniform Exhibit Evaluation Form. And that is really helpful because it gives you a plan for structuring your title page. And I'm sure that Andrew will talk about that. But it's very good to use that as a plan for your title page. There are lots of books on the subject. A lot of them can be borrowed from the APS library. A lot of things on Canadian subjects can be borrowed from the Harry Sutherland Library. Take time to go to shows and see what others are doing. Try and rate the exhibits. Do you actually agree with what the judges say? Hang on. There's the feedback form. When I structure my title page, I do exhibit title. I do the treatment plan, under which I explain the things in italics to the right, my philatelic subject knowledge, the rarity, including quantifying it, and how I've laid it out. And that's how I set up my feedback. But that's how I do my when I plan. Some philatelic advice, last of all, from that great philatelic exhibitor, Sir Francis Drake, who said, "There must be a beginning of any great matter, but the continuing unto the end until it be thoroughly finished yields the true glory. And I really truly believe that this can be applied specifically to getting into exhibiting. You just have to start. You don't have to be afraid. There are lots of people around that will help you. So that ends my session. There is a question. If you have any other questions, we'll get to those in a second. I just want to tell you that you will not want to miss Andrew Kelly's presentation, how to develop your idea into an exhibit, which will take place next week. Andrew is one of the most brilliant but accessible people that I've had the chance to talk to. And he has recently won the major APS award for his most recent exhibit, which is very well deserved. And he's a brilliant thinker on how to develop an exhibit. So I hope you will join him for that. Okay, so let's just go to the questions quickly, and then we have one question. Did my 3-cent exhibit qualify as a topical or thematic or another category? No, I put it in under traditional philately because it was largely about a specific stamp with an stamp issue and the resulting postal history of that. So I put it in as a traditional event, or as a traditional exhibit. Okay, let's see what my team of people here. I hope you have had a chance to look at some of these comments. Let me go to my, okay, good. So it appears that Tom Bodem, Bodem, is the recipient of the David Piercy's book. So Tom, if you go to the rpsc.org website, under Society, you will find my email address. Under Society, there's a list of people, and I'll be listed under President. Send me your address, and I will make sure that we get around to shipping that out to you this week. Okay, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you to everybody who shared their thoughts on this tonight. And I hope it's been valuable. I hope you have learned a little bit about specifically how not to be worried and afraid when you're preparing to do an exhibit. I would say give it a shot and do what your gut tells you to do. Exhibit what you love, and what you will learn out of it will be a remarkable thing. So thank you all for coming tonight. We look forward to seeing you next week, and have a wonderful evening. Take care.